Hi, thank you for tuning into Noire Histoire. I'm Natasha, and today I'll be discussing The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. The Underground Railroad is a book that tells the story of Cora, a young slave woman in Georgia who, along with another slave on the plantation named Caesar, come up with a plan to try to escape to the north. The Underground Railroad, the real Underground Railroad was a series of houses, shops, and other establishments that helped slaves along their journey from slavery in the South to freedom in the free or northern states, and then later Canada as well. But in Colson Whitehead's book, the Underground Railroad is reimagined as a real railroad. It has trains and like hand carts, and then also actual train stations. Each station is still tied to either a house or an establishment or something like that, sort of like an above ground facade that, where there's someone tied to the railroad. The railroad functions as a way of quickly moving the characters from one location to another without having to, really delve very deeply into their journey from one point to another. It sort of uses as a plot device to speed things up a little bit, or at least that's the way that I saw it. The main character, Cora, is recruited by another slave, Caesar. Cora is a woman, Caesar is a man, to join him as he tries to escape north. Caesar is relatively new to the plantation. Cora had been born on the plantation. Caesar was motivated to ask Cora to join him because he'd been watching her for a while. Cora is a bit of an outcast on the plantation due to some events, but has a certain internal strength and willpower, just something within her, a driving force within her that pushes her to do the right thing and to take a stand and to take chances. We see this in two instances. One where during a celebration, Cora steps up to defend another slave who is, I believe, either being beaten or about to be beaten. She steps in and takes some of the blows for him. Not really frowned upon, but it was an action. She took an action that no one else around dared to take. Right? Everyone else was equally uneasy, just as probably terrified as she was, but yet still, even in the face of danger and possible harm to herself, Cora stepped forward and, did what was right by trying to defend this child. There was also another instance where, we don't actually see it, but we're told about this past instance where there's this plot of land that had been passed down to Cora in the slave quarters, this little plot of land that had been passed down to Cora from her mother, who'd gotten the plot of land from her mother. So this was really the only thing that Cora owned. Now, the legitimacy of that is, a different story, but it was this thing that she'd nurtured and tended, and that had been nurtured and tended by her mother, and also by her mother's mother, so it had a lot of personal value to her, special value to her. It was this small plot of land, this little square of land that they grew vegetables and things like that on for themselves. And so it's something that she took deep pride in. It was small and not that, not much of anything to write home about, but it was this little thing that she owned, the only thing that she owned in the world, and more importantly, something that had been passed down to her by her mother and her grandmother. And when someone else stepped in, far larger than Cora, menacing, someone that everyone else on the plantation had sort of decided that they'd stay away from and stay out of his way and give him free rein, when he decided that he wanted to take this piece of land for himself, Cora once again decided, that wasn't right, that she was going to stand up for her rights, and she was going to defend this piece of land. She was going to take back this land that belonged to her. That act actually resulted in her being ostracized from the rest of the from the general slave population on the plantation, where most people sort of avoided her or ignored her. But again, it was another example of this will and determination and sense of right and wrong within Cora that Caesar, at that point he wasn't on the plantation, he'd heard about, that made him think, well, this is someone that I should have along on the journey, most likely because that driving force would come in handy in the course of this dangerous journey, this dangerous goal that he wanted to achieve. Cora was also known on the plantation because she came from this line of women who were different. Her grandmother, Ajari, had actually come over to America on a slave ship at a very young age. I believe she was a child, not even like in her teens. And her mother, Mabel, was the first person within their line to be born in America. She was born into slavery. And her mother, several years before the start of the book, had taken it upon herself when Cora was still a child that she was going to strike out and try to achieve freedom. And so she ran off from the plantation. I believe she was the only slave to run away and to have not been caught. So that was another. So there were these two notable women in Cora's family that sort of, put this halo on her of being from a special line of women, a special line of people. The book is quite interesting because during the time before Cora and Caesar run away, there's a little bit of exploration of the relationship between slaves, the society, the slave society on a plantation, the hierarchy, how it's determined which slaves will live in which cabins, how slaves pair up, romantically and things of that nature. The book touches on the plight of slave men and also slave women. The idea that slave men are present and seem normal in everyday life and went out and mixing with the rest of the plantation. But through Caesar's perspective and through Caesar's backstory, we come to realize, or it's touched upon, that, slave men, many of them, even, the biggest, burliest, and, manliest of the slave men, show a veneer of masculinity by day, but then they cry when they're alone at night because, simply because of dealing with the stress of slavery, the loneliness of it, the isolation, the longing that many of them have to, have someone in their lives, to have some kind of connection, permanent, right? Not the precarious, could be gone at any moment kind of, slave relationships or relationships between slaves. The feelings of loneliness and despair about their situation, the circumstances under which they live. Another thing that's also touched on is the vulnerability of slave women, which is something that I've read about and that's been explored in other books. But the way that this book touches on it is a little bit different. Well, not really. It explores more of how the vulnerability of slave women on a plantation, but more from the perspective of how that plays into the wider slave society on a plantation. How women in certain cabins might be more vulnerable to sexual assault, or how favored women reside in certain cabins or receive the assaults on slave women by not only slave owners and overseers, but also slave men. But then the flip side of that there's a certain tenderness because of this shared vulnerability that allows the slave women to find comfort within each other, where even the women that are ostracized by the rest of the slaves on the plantation, that they still somewhat have someone to turn to. That they form their own bonds and their own, they provide each other with comfort, even within this very trying situation. The broader hardships of slavery, but then also the additional, difficulties that come with being ostracized from the rest of the plantation. I decided to read The Underground Railroad after pretty much seeing it everywhere. It was on Oprah's reading list. I've seen in some of the book groups that I'm a part of and some of the websites that I read that quite a few people had it on their reading list. I've gotten pretty positive reviews and things like that, so I decided to pick it up and read it. I thought it was pretty good. Not as amazing as I expected it to be, but usually when, there's a lot of fanfare about most things, it tends to not be like this big spectacular thing like, you really thought it was. But I think it was partially because I built up expectations really high in my mind. Still a really solid book, but, I didn't really see what everyone thought was so amazing about it, but I still enjoyed it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you return to listen to future episodes. For more information about Noire Histoire, visit the Noire Histoire website at noirehistoire.com. There you'll find text, video, and audio for each episode all in one place. Subscribe to the Noire Histoire newsletter to get fresh content delivered straight to your email inbox. You can also subscribe to the Noire Histoire YouTube channel for videos. I also occasionally post videos on Facebook. If you're enjoying the content but would prefer to listen to audio, you can subscribe to the Noire Histoire podcast via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and SoundCloud. If you subscribe, please also take a few minutes to rate and review the show in iTunes. Follow Noire Histoire on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, and Google+. Enjoy the rest of your day.